Big East preview. This is a fun conference. Now, we don't get to talk Big East in football because there isn't one, right? When we're talking about half of these teams, we haven't talked about these schools at all because they're not football teams. And then some of them are FCS schools. Really, I think the only one I'm looking at right now that is a Division I FBS school is UConn, and we know how well that's working out for them in football, right? So, but when you look at them in basketball, hey, in college football, a lot of basketball schools are doing well this year. Unfortunately, UConn is just not one of them. Okay, but when you look at the Big East, we had a great Big East last season. We saw some great surprises. We saw some very exciting ways of how it ended. I'm going to let you take over real quick. Your thoughts of the Big East before we dig into our first four and our sleeper.
Okay, well, when you're talking about the Big East, it's the big Catholic conference. I mean, ultimately, it's the Catholic schools, and that is what built college basketball. Was the Jesuits and the Franciscans and the various orders pouring money into basketball teams because they couldn't afford to build a football stadium and for travel costs, but they could have little gyms and they could bring in the best of the local players because their moms and their grandparents insisted that the kids go to the local Catholic university and not the big university out of state. That's what the Big East, in essence, was. You can't call it the Big Vatican or the Big Catholic. So the Big East made sense because it was predominantly the Northeast corridor, a little bit down into the Middle Atlantic states. Now the conference has changed, as all conferences have changed. But the Big East, there's a reason they're still featured every week on ESPN. I mean, they make it a point. Their fan bases are rabid, probably, and this is almost sacrilegious to say, probably more rabid than even the fan bases of the ACC. And when you think college basketball, you think the ACC. Ultimately, that is the gold standard in college basketball, is the ACC. I think the Big East schools have developed an even more passionate, more, dare I say, loyal fan base, because I think even the bad teams in the Big East, they still turn out big crowds. You don't have off nights. You don't have to move games on campus. You can still play them at some of the bigger arenas in the bigger cities that the Big East is built around. The Big East is going to be interesting to follow because probably more than any other conference, they've had more coaching changes. We talked about a lot of them, already, but they've had more coaching changes than just about any conference that I've been able to take a look at, real in depth. I mean, I haven't done the deep dive into the smaller conferences yet. We'll be getting there, but the Big East is always going to be a factor. And the thing with the Big East, for better or worse, they always will have more favor with the selection committee because of the brand of basketball they play. And it's by far, well, I shouldn't say by far, because the Big Ten's is a physical conference too, but you don't want to play Big East teams in non-conference games. Even the lower echelon Big East teams are physical and tough, and you come out of the game and you're not hurt, but you're banged up and you're drained. So the Big East, I'm so glad we're talking about it in the first show. I'm a Northeastern guy. I grew up in New Jersey. It wasn't a big deal to hop on a train to get to the Garden to go to see the various tournaments. The Big East will always hold a special place in my heart because the Big East got done what Joe Paterno couldn't get done in football. They brought all these Eastern powers together. Well, Joe Paterno was too busy about making Penn State look good. But that's a different show.
That's a different show. That's right. All right. Well, I'm going to let you pick the first team here on our first four for the Big East to get started. So go ahead. Tell me why you think Georgetown is going to win the Big East.
It is not the Georgetown Hoyas. Though again,
okay, hang on first, real quick before I get started. Let me just cut you off. Will they at least win a conference game this year in Georgetown? They were 0-19 last year. I mean, they improved, right? They improved. They got to win at least one.
I think they'll win a couple.
Okay. All right.
Because the very top has sort of come toward the middle, so I think there's more opportunity.
There it is.
I shouldn't say the very top, because the best
top.
team in the Big East, even though they're not an Eastern school, are the Blue Jays of Creighton. Most polls have them somewhere between 4 and 6 or 7. We talked about North Carolina probably being the presumed number 1 team in the country to start the season. I could make some pretty strong arguments that Creighton is the best team in the country. Top to bottom, starting 5 to bench, they are the best team in the country. And nobody is going to want to have them in their draw come tournament time.
I'm with you on that. I think Creighton is the team to beat in the Big East. I think they're a legit top 10 team to start off the season. And I mean, that's, you know how it goes with the beginning of the year, where you put a team 1 through 10, it doesn't really matter after the first couple weeks, but they're a legit top 10 team. You know, you could put them top 5 if you really wanted to. I wouldn't bat a single eye. 23-12 record last year, 12-7 in the Big East. They made it to the Big East championship game, lost to Villanova, but it really felt like they had so many issues, so many setbacks, so many obstacles in their way of injuries, and really they had a young squad last year, and they still found a way to be successful. Now, they lost 2 starters last year, but they still have, I think, a great team. And they have a lot of, when you look at who is on the team, you know, you got Duke transfer guard Alex O'Connell, you got Ryan Hawkins, who should be approved. I think that this team is going to be the best team in the Big East. And that's not coming lightly, because I think that there is, I know we talked about it in the ACC, there were 9 or 10 teams that can compete. I think there are 5 teams that can compete in the Big East. And that's saying something in this conference, because I think there is a gap in the tiers in this conference compared to maybe some of the other big name conferences. But when you look at that top tier, the tippy top, Creighton is on that for me.
And remember, their floor general, Ryan, I think it's Nemhard is how you pronounce his name. He broke his wrist at the beginning of February. He missed the rest of the season. And they still had a great Big East tournament run. They still, in the postseason, did very, very well. We alluded to in our college football podcast this week, South Dakota State. They have a big transfer from South Dakota State. People keep saying he's the new Larry Bird. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but watching him play at South Dakota State, he's the reason that South Dakota State pulled off some pretty big wins against some pretty good programs last year. He is going to be the difference maker. I mean, he's 6'7", so he can play on the front line. He's a decent rebounder, but he can shoot from anywhere.
Yeah, he's going to be a great wing. Yeah, Baylor Shireman, that's his name. Yeah. And he's going to be a fantastic wing for this team. I think something that they weren't necessarily missing, but could definitely have had improved from last year. And you're right about Nemhard. They had the injury last year that hurt him. But even though with his injury, him and Trey Alexander both really exceeded expectations in the backcourt for this team. Again, Creighton is going to be one of those teams that we really got to watch out and pay attention to. I think that they're going to benefit on maybe some of these coaching changes, because Greg McDermott is top-notch coach. If we were putting him in another conference, we would still put him as one of the top notches in the conference. I know we talked how big it was in the ACC.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, now that Jay Wright's out in Villanova, you would maybe have to hand the reins to maybe the best coach in the Big East, to Greg McDermott.
They have a tough front line as well. So they're a balanced team. They learned a lot from their late season run. The toughest thing for them is now they are the hunted. They're not the team that everybody thinks, oh boy, that guy's pretty good. That was a pretty good win. Everybody's going to be gunning for them in the Big East and in any non-conference games. They know how good Creighton is. They know how well coached they are. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to that in the early going of the Big East. I could see them losing a game that perhaps on paper you would think, oh boy, how did they lose to Seton Hall, or how did they lose, well, they won't lose to Georgetown, but I'm just using them as an example. How did they lose to Georgetown? But then come the end of the year, that's going to pay huge dividends for them come tournament time, both the Big East tournament and the NCAA tournament. And I think they're going to be a number one seed. That's how high I am on Creighton. I think they have all of the pieces. If everything comes together and that experience brings out the next level on players like Kaluma, for example, I think sounds like I've been coaching a game here already. I'm so excited about talking about college basketball. I think they're going to be a number one seed, and they're going to be a nightmare for anybody they play.
If any team, I think, in the Big East will give them a run for their money, it's the defending Big East champions, the Villanova Wildcats. Obviously, another big question, another big shoes to fill. We talked about it with the ACC preview at Duke. This is probably the second biggest shoes to fill in a college coaching vacancy. Jay Wright out after 21 seasons with Villanova. In steps Kyle Neptune, longtime assistant under Jay Wright, heads over to Fordham last year to take some head coaching duties. It sounded like he was getting a little bit of confidence himself, a little more experience on himself. Comes on back to take over the Wildcats. There's a really interesting stat that was on the CBS basketball podcast that talked about in like the last 100 years, there's only like 3 Villanova coaches. They love to get long-term coaches. So I'm sure they're doing exactly what they want to do with Neptune. They want to keep him around for a very long time. They feel like they probably groomed him based on being Wright's assistant for a long time. If anyone is going to shock Creighton, it's Villanova. I know that they are probably going to take a little bit of a step back because Neptune is building up his team again, but they still have a lot of good things to be excited for, Steve.
Oh, absolutely. And, Neptune, again, we follow the A-10. Fordham was a tough game for everybody in that even if it was only for a half. He's a good coach. He knows how to bring the best out in players. Brandon Slater is your typical Villanova star player in that he gets incrementally but noticeably better every year. And especially with his shooting accuracy, that's absolutely the case. And that is going to help Villanova withstand some of the deluges that might come from other more flashy offensive teams. He's going to be able to come back when things are looking a little bit tight, pull up, hit the three-pointer, hit the key jumper, calm everything back down. Okay, good. Okay. We just, it was an 8-0 run, 10-0 run. Okay, we're back in it. We're back in control now. He's that kind of player. Justin Moore, senior guard, again, he's going to be a calming influence. He's been there through the good times under Jay Wright and at Villanova. He can say, look, get in a huddle and say, guys, it's okay. Let's go back to what we know that we do. Let's not try to get into a run and gun game with these guys. Though they have the talent that they could get away with it against some teams. Let's play our game, play some tough defense, get our noses dirty, get our noses bloodied if we have to. That's Villanova basketball in a lot of ways. A lot of talent on this team. I don't think going from Wright to Neptune is going to be as big of a shock to the players in that locker room now. It'll be interesting as to see what happens recruiting down the road, but we're not talking about recruiting down the road now. We're talking about what's going to happen in the 22-23 season. And as you said, Villanova, they're not going to be, 5 games behind Creighton in the Big East standings. They're a good basketball team, but I think they're going to have to be satisfied with being the second best team in the Big East and then take their chances come NCAA tournament time.
The Justin Moore injury does concern me a little bit. Him tearing his Achilles in the Elite Eight. He's going to miss some chunk of the season at the beginning. When he comes back, obviously that's going to be great because he is the second best player on that team behind Slater. Look to see Mark Armstrong step into that guard role. He's a true freshman, so it honestly decides to see what's going to happen there. But when you look at the schedule in November and December for Villanova, they do play Michigan State. They do play Iowa State. They do see teams like at the end of the year in December, they do start hitting in conference play. St. John's, UConn, Marquette, not the top dogs. We could say UConn's in that mix, but not the top dogs. So you hope that they can get the job done in the majority of those games. If he can come back by the beginning of the year, especially in February when they really start getting down the stretch and they do see Creighton, February 4th is the game against Creighton in Creighton. And it's going to be that's when they're really going to need Justin Moore. But initially that does concern me. They're going to have to find a way to win ball games without him. If they can, then they are going to be able to compete with Creighton down the stretch. If they can't, then I could easily see them stepping back. And unfortunately, maybe we would see them 5 or 6 games behind Creighton because I don't see Creighton slowing down anytime soon.
No. And then apparently Justin Moore's already been told, I don't care how good you feel. I don't care how hard you rehab. You're not coming back before January 1st. Right. He's already been told that. And I think Moore's already kind of bought into that. And Achilles injury is so tricky that, like you said, maybe it is February before he comes back or later in January. But if you look at their schedule and you can pencil in Moore playing even significant minutes, not necessarily, starting 5 minutes, but significant minutes in those early games, I think Villanova is going to be able to take a deep breath and say, okay, we're going to be okay. We're not where we need to be yet, but we're going to be okay. So Villanova, it'll be weird not seeing Jay Wright, on the sidelines. But as far as in games, I don't know how much would be missed by having Neptune leading this team. And I think, again, the incremental improvement that these teams always seem to show is what is going to make Villanova special again in 22-23.
Probably the biggest game that Justin Moore would miss would be at the end of December, and that is at UConn. So let's go ahead and let's talk about UConn because that is a team on our list. The UConn Huskies, they have, to me, one of the craziest big guys in all of college basketball, Adama Sandango. And I mean, this guy is unreal. One of the best big guys last year. You can only imagine what he's going to put up this season. When you look at UConn last season, they went 13-6 in the conference, 23-10 overall. That's about where I see them this year. I see them about exactly right there. I can see them as the 3rd or 4th team in the Big East. They could battle for the Big East lead. Don't get me wrong, but to me, the ceiling is runner-up. What about you?
Oh, no, I agree. And a lot of people will look at Connecticut and say, oh, my God, they lost 4 guys through the transfer portal, 4 pretty important guys on there. But when you look at who their coach is and Dan Hurley, he's a no-nonsense. Look, I don't care how talented you are. You're going to play our system. If you're not going to play our system, then you need to go. And I think from that standpoint, Hurley knows that he needs to get guys to play, I don't want to call it a 4 corners offense, but in essence, it kind of is. And then do everything they can to get the ball into Sinago, but still be able to keep teams honest by being able to hit the threes. And I think the players that transferred out had maybe a higher opinion of what their value was to a college basketball team than what Dan Hurley saw and what Dan Hurley knew he needed to have in place to capitalize on the immense talent that Sinago has. And you touched on it. The sky is the limit. I don't think we really know what he's going to do. We really don't know how high that ceiling is. we know what the floor is, and that floor is better than half the front court people in the Big East for sure, and probably more than half in the country. So UConn is going to go as far as Sinago can get them. They're going to have to be more consistent on the perimeter to make real noise in the Big East. But I mean, they're definitely. I think you doing that 5 cutoff for the Big East. I think that's fair. There could be some surprises, but I think there's a lot of teams that need to restock. And under new coaches, they will do that over the next year or two. But for right now, UConn is in that upper echelon of the Big East. And will they make it to the 16? I can see them making it to the 16.
Yeah, I could definitely see UConn making it that far. I wouldn't rule it out whatsoever. They have a pretty easy November to start off until they get to the Phil Knight Invitational, where they take on Oregon. If they win that, they could see Villanova early. So that's something to keep in mind. Didn't really think of that when we were talking about Villanova. What I'm interested about UConn, other than Sinago, is their guards. Both of them come in transfers, one from East Carolina, one from Virginia Tech. How will Hurley do with those guards? I'm interested in that one. I think that is something that is not going to be an easy task, to get them all on the same page right away. Hopefully they had a good offseason, a good preseason, and get them stepping. Now, it's not like they came from FCS schools. Newton came from East Carolina and Allen came from Virginia Tech. So it's not like they're going to be missing any of the competition. They know what they're getting themselves into. So that's probably the biggest question mark that I will have initially when we're looking at them playing Stonehill and Boston U and UB, to start off their season pretty easy. I want to see their guard play mesh.
But I think, again, those Hurley, those are the kind of players he wants to bring in to this program. And I vaguely remember the kid from Virginia Tech. I can't say that I could break down a specific game or part of his game, but he seemed to. I know he made contributions to their ACC tournament success. So, I think his shot. I think of all of the guys that are going to be there, he might be the best pure shooter that UConn can count on that they have on their roster as far as an outside threat. I'm not talking about the beast of the East, inside. I'm talking about an outside shot. So, Dan Hurley he's a different generation. He's not as crazy as he's kind of crazy, and his players are going to play his way. And I think for a team like UConn, who still hasn't gotten to the upper echelon of basketball teams, again, that means it's been a program build. They've had some flash of successes and then slid down. I think Hurley's going to get them to the point where every year exactly what they're going to be. So UConn is going to be interesting. UConn's going to be one of those teams that they might say, well, maybe they're on the bubble. Yeah, but they're probably going to get in. And even if they're in one of those stupid play-in games where you shouldn't have higher seeds being a play-in game, but that's another show, they can cause some problems in any bracket.
I'm with you. All right, let's finish off our first 4 here, and we're going with Xavier. And I think this could be a controversial pick with the Xavier Musketeers, especially what we have seen with them the last 2 seasons. They start off hot, and then they find a way to miss the NCAA tournament. In 2020 to 21 season, they started the season 11-2, and then had 13-8 at the rest of the year and missed the tournament. Last year, they started off 14-3, Steve. You go into Selection Sunday, 18-13. Well, that was good enough to fire their coach, Travis Steele. Comes back Sean Miller. So here we go. Sean Miller returned as the head coach after leading Xavier from 2004 to 2009. Is this going to be one of those nice reunions, one of those happy to be backs? Or are we going to see Xavier reborn in this Big East? I have a lot of hope for the Xavier team. I like their transfer in Sully Bohm from UTEP. I think that is someone that can really step up and help them out in the backcourt.
Absolutely.
18 points a game last year in UTEP. I think that's the perfect kind of transfer you need when you're bringing a guy like Sean Miller back to really try and jumpstart this team back to where they were. Again, they start off strong, so it shows that the skill is there. But something happens in the late stretch and the last few seasons that's really hurt them. And unfortunately, that's when conference play happens. So that just shows right there that lately they haven't been able to stick up against their conference. So they're going to be able to do that this season.
I think they will. I think it's just going to be a happy reunion. Say what you will about Sean Miller and the controversies at Arizona. Best case scenario, he had an inkling of what was going on and just sort of didn't dig into it the way he should have. Maybe it comes out ultimately that he had a lot more to do with it than has been proven so far. But he gets to the NCAA tournament. He gets the best out of every team he coaches. I don't know that Arizona had the most talent in the Pac-12 every year. Had great players at times, but I don't know if they had the best talent. They competed for conference titles. They went to the tournament. What he did at Xavier was magical. I mean, seriously, especially, the first couple of years that they got to the tournament. I think players like to play for him. He has Colby Jones, who he looks like an NBA player, and he can flat out shoot. Good piece. Zach Fremantle, one of those big kind of guys where you look at him and like, is he really good? He doesn't look athletic or doesn't look this. Look at the end of the game. He's got the numbers to prove he's a good college basketball player. So I think Miller has the pieces here that he can keep Xavier near the top, and he can take advantage of some of the teams that have slipped a bit or that are at the bottom of the conference, and he can kind of pad the resume that way. I had meant to look at their out-of-conference schedule this year because I think that's the other issue. They're playing cupcakes for the most part, or unless they're invited to a tournament, they're playing cupcakes. I didn't look at their schedule this year, but it would, in this case, new coach, some new pieces, it's going to help them build that chemistry and feel comfortable with the system that Miller's going to bring so that when it comes to conference time, they're not going to have that dramatic fall off and slide back, and that they're going to be able to finish near the top and quite possibly get to an NCAA tournament berth.
Yeah, I think a bid is exactly what they need to be shooting for this year. Maybe not the top of the Big East, but a bid. Looking at that, they were invited to some tournaments. They're going to be in the Gavitt tip-off games. They're going to host Indiana on the 18th of November, and then they're also in the Phil Knight Legacy tournament, and they're going to take on Florida in the first round. What I'm excited about is the beginning of December for their non-conference plays. They're going to be a part of the Big East Big 12 battle. They're taking on West Virginia. I think that's going to be a fun one. And then, of course, the Skyline Chili Crosstown Shootout. Okay, don't forget about that. Xavier versus Cincinnati. That'll be a good game. So the first two games of December should really by December 10th, December 11th, once that game's over between Xavier and Cincy, we should get a good idea of what they look like before they start digging into conference play. And it looks like they start off against Georgetown this year on the 16th of December. All right, let's get into our sleeper. It's not Georgetown. Sorry, even though we talked about them at the beginning of the show. Again, I do think Georgetown's going to get at least one conference win. All right, I'm not trying to make them a joke, but Patrick Ewing, we got to do something here. All right. So, all right, Providence Friars. That is the sleeper team for us. And again, I think we're throwing controversy around in this Big East preview, Steve, because Providence won the Big East, at least at the end of the season. Before the tournament started, they led the Big East. It was a dream season for Providence, though. They had everything went their way, 27-6, 14-3 in Big East play. They were at 82% win percentage in the Big East. A lot of really interesting things went down for them. They got some transfers coming in as well. This team was last year a fluke of a season, or just like everything was perfect, cloud nine. I don't think they can make it happen again, or as you and I might think, because we got them as a sleeper team, they could really show that they could do it all over again.
This is a conversation. If we pulled every podcast for the last 25 years that talked about Providence and the Big East, the same kind of things you pointed out, well, they were lucky, or they just went on a good run, or everything came together for them. But almost every year they seem to be in the tournament and even going to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. That's by design. Okay, it's not divine providence, but it's by design that Providence at the end of every year is good. Another school that has tradition of bringing in one or two of three players, having supplemental players fill out the rosters and complement and play off the strengths of those big talents. And then at the end of the year, everybody says, how did we lose to them? Providence is the reason that analytics cannot be part of college basketball discussions, because every analytics geek is going to say Providence is lucky. Providence plays above its talent. No, it doesn't. It plays with its talent to its talents. And Providence is going to be a player in the Big East as long as there's a Big East.
I'm with you. I mean, they started their season 21-2 last year. They wound up going 27-6 at the end of it. But the biggest thing, they went 16-1 at home last year. They know how to protect their home court. And I think they used to call it the dunk. I think they're calling it the amp now. I mean, the atmosphere there. Like if you were going to talk about amazing atmospheres in college basketball, I don't think Providence would come to your mind, but it's one of those ones.
For me, it would, yeah.
Well, that's good, but I don't think it's one that the majority of people would pay attention to, but it's one you should. It's one you definitely should. And you're right. They find a way to make it to the second weekend. They lost in the Sweet 16 this year, but you know who they lost to? They lost to Kansas. Kansas won the whole damn thing. So I like Providence. I think this team is an easy sleeper for me. These are the 5 teams in the Big East that I think could, with the exception of Creighton, because I think Creighton is in its own category, its own right now. I think the other 4 could be in second, third, fourth, or fifth. And no matter way you look at it, and I would be completely understandable with it. Wouldn't bat one eye if we saw a team like Villanova fall to 5th for a year. And it'd be like, okay, well, that's what happens with a first-year coach, maybe. And we see Providence go up to second. I could totally see that happening. Any of the teams we just talked about, they have a chance to win the Big East. I just don't think it's going to be anybody but Creighton.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's the fun part about these previews is that, we're able to kind of we're trying to project out what we think is going to happen based on history. But with a team like Providence, it's easier because their history is they defy the odds, they defy the projections, and they end up in the tournament virtually every year. If not the NCAA, then they're in the NIT. And that's what makes following teams like Providence. And that's a road trip that maybe we need to make at some point during the history of this podcast that we do. It is an unbelievable fan experience.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And that's something we definitely should do. We should get on the road with this thing. All right. Some of the schools before we get you out of here that could have deserved the sleeper spot in the Big East. Marquette could have deserved it. Obviously, Seton Hall. I know we're going to hear about that one. Seton Hall could have definitely deserved that slot. And you could even give St. John's a run for their money as a possible sleeper in this conference. I think that's about it, though. I'm not too high on Butler this year. A lot to do. And then DePaul and Georgetown are in their category of their own, battling for the basement.
Yeah, well, no, yeah. I mean, Seton Hall, it was hard for me. I had to step outside of my fandom. I mean, and I will apologize in advance on this first preview. You're going to hear me talk a lot about New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia schools. It's what I grew up on. I still follow those teams. Even if they're irrelevant, I still follow those teams. That's why I love Duquesne, because I remember seeing them in the Garden when the NIT was the bigger tournament and not the NCAAs. So I apologize in advance for that. It was hard for me not to push for Seton Hall, but I have to be realistic. Holloway's a great coach. It was not a fluke that St. Peter's got to the 8, but they graduated a lot of players. They need to retool a little bit, and he's the perfect guy to do that retooling, bringing in the right kind of players. So Seton Hall, if this is a down year by Seton Hall standards, they're going to be at the top of our preview for next season.
Absolutely. And we might be talking about them when we preview the Big East for the championship once we get down to down the March.